Welcome, everyone, to Couch Potato Diary. Happy Tuesday. My name is Peter Klein. Thank you very much for tuning in today. Are we a little off sync again today? Hopefully not. But it should be a fun one today. As Toxic mentioned in the chat, coming off of the first win, finally, for the Vampire in the Vampire League. And now, because of how that league is set up, just one game out of a playoff spot, baby. So there's some waiver wire pickups that can help the Vampire team. We will get into that as the show goes on, plus the dumpster darlings of the week, a little bit of NHL and some fight stuff as well. Okay, we're synced up, we're good to go. Awesome to hear that. We're going to begin, though, with the gigantic trade from the National Football League today, as the Vegas Raiders have sent Davante Adams on his way to New York. So apparently Davante Adams can only play with quarterbacks that Davante Adams has already played with, as he has been shipped to the New York Jets in exchange for a conditional second-round pick. The conditions on that pick: if Davante Adams is on the Jets starting roster for the AFC Championship game or for the Super Bowl, it becomes a second-round pick, or if he is, I believe, first or second team All-Pro, which, I mean, right now, none of those seem super likely, but the championship one seems much more likely than Adams making it to an all-pro team. So obviously a lot of different ways to go about this one. We'll start with what it means for the Jets, who are coming off of an extremely disappointing loss against the Buffalo Bills on Monday Night Football. And they are obviously in win now mode. When you go out and acquire Aaron Rodgers, it is championship or bust time, right? Like that's what it is. That is the world that you enter when you have a 40-year-old quarterback and you have made the moves that you have made. And this team has not been good enough offensively. And it really does seem like things are starting to get into a bit of a groove with Rodgers and Garrett Wilson. It still seems a little bit labored with getting him the football, and he still needs to be the guy. And now you have a very good number two in Davante Adams, albeit one who is certainly on the decline and one who is certainly starting to fade as the years kind of go on. I still think he is a really good receiver, and I do think that Aaron Rodgers is the best quarterback for him, because with Adams, one of the things that has got him in trouble, whether it was, well, not in trouble, but one of the ways that the Raiders were unable to use him, I guess effectively, is Jimmy Garoppolo is not a risk-taking quarterback. And it certainly doesn't seem like Aiden O'Connell is at this point either. You kind of need to be open for them to think that you're open. Davante Adams is not a great separator at this point in his career. What he is someone who is huge, and someone who is very good at catching footballs, and someone who is very good at winning those one-on-one battles. And so when you have quarterbacks who are a little bit reluctant to throw balls into coverage, and you have a guy who always looks like he is in coverage, it is just not a good mesh. But Aaron Rodgers has worked with Davante Adams enough to know that even when if Davante's in one-on-one, he's never really covered. Like, he's kind of always open. And he is someone who is so good at the contested catch that they will be able to go out and make a play. And knocking microphones all over the place. Sorry. He will be able to go out and make a play and be able to step up for this team and kind of take care of those catches. And so I think that there is I think there's a real chance that this actually works out okay. And they are going to, it's tough because I think this will improve them. But I don't think that this is going to be okay, well, now everything is fixed. Because there's still problems. They got run all over by a backup running back last night. And there are still problems with missing kicks and all of those sorts of things. And also, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what kind of, I guess... It doesn't matter what kind of players you bring in. If the offensive play calling isn't good enough, the offensive play calling isn't good enough. So this is not going to completely take care of the biggest issue that this team has, but it does make them a better football team than they were before. It gives them now a better option than Alan Lazard as a number 2 and another playmaker for an offense that desperately needed another playmaker in their offense. So I do think that this does make the Jets a little bit better of a football team. On the Raiders side of things, this was not handled very well. And I think once they made the decision to let Derek Carr go, I think that you need to also make the decision to let Davante Adams go. You brought him in there specifically because he wanted to play with Derek Carr. And so when you send his guy out, you're going to have probably a not overly enthused wide receiver on your hands. And then it was clear that they didn't have they went with Jimmy Garoppolo, so I think you were trying to convince yourselves that you were going to be a winning football team, but when that didn't happen, Adams should have been the first one out of there. Instead, they turn what could have been maybe a guy you got a first-round pick for a guy that it is maybe a second if everything goes your way. So the overall handling of the Adams situation was another in a very long line of very poor handled situations for the Vegas Raiders franchise. And now it just, I don't know where they go from here, because this is not a very talented roster, and it is a coach that on a pretty consistent basis feels like he is in over his head now. And so you are basically starting over, and that is why you are getting a lot of the rumors of the Detroit Lions looking at a Max Crosby in terms of going out and making a trade. There isn't a whole lot of value on this Raider roster right now, and it kind of feels like you need to start over out there in Las Vegas. In terms of the actual trade for 2024 here on August 15th, I think they got about as good of value as you could have from the Jets. There was rumors that the Chiefs would have gone up to a second to get Davante Adams. If that is the case, then this is a bit of a miss. And we have talked about it before. I don't think anyone would be going after the trade of Adams to the Kansas City Chiefs. And it's like, oh, well, now the Chiefs are better than the Raiders. That this is what really puts it over the top. No, that's not it. The whole, oh, you can't trade them in division is so dumb, I think, in 2024. So if that it actually ends up being the case, then whatever. But you still have at least a path to a second-round pick. It frees up a ton of cap space. Now, the Raiders had a ton of cap space last year, spent it on a defensive tackle who's now hurt. But again, they are in a spot now where they can go out and try to make a move. But if you are looking at what the core foundation is of the Vegas Raiders right now, it's kind of Max Crosby and nothing. There are guys who are good, Spillane is, I think, a really good linebacker and feels like someone who is just kind of, they've cloned. He's one of those guys that feels like he's been cloned because he is just it feels like he's in 4 different spots at once. But again, after that, there isn't a ton, and they have a couple gadgety type guys on offense, but all 3 running backs kind of suck. Neither of the quarterbacks have shown that they can be any good at all. This is just, it's a bad football team. From a fantasy football standpoint now, as we kind of transition into the fantasy discussion, I do think that Davante Adams still has significant fantasy value. A lot of the value that he had coming into the year was that he was going to be the number 1 guy on this offense, and now he's not. But he is going to, I think, while we are not big fans of the Jets offense in general, I do think that it is going to be I do think it is going to be a step up for this team from what the Raiders were. And also, we have seen a lot of teams focus a lot of their coverage over on Garrett Wilson. And so 2 things can happen here, obviously. One, that's going to continue to happen and Davante Adams can feast. Or Adams goes there and you at least have to pay a little bit more attention to him than you would Alan freaking Lazard. And so you can't just load up on one guy. And that kind of helps both of them out. I would assume it is going to be more that one, that it's not just going to be everything focused over on Wilson and then Davante Adams does his thing. For Alan Lazard, I don't think there's any fantasy value left at all, quite frankly. But I do think that for Garrett Wilson owners, this is a positive. And for Davante Adams owners, he's going to be playing now because I do think that hamstring will all of a sudden have healed up, which is nothing short of miraculous, really. And so I think that is a really good opportunity now for this for Davante Adams fantasy owners to actually have this guy who has a connection with the quarterback go out there and maybe ball out a little bit. So I do think that it is kind of positive for those guys. And for the Raiders dudes, you've been doing it for a bit now. Like Brock Bowers is an every week play. Jacoby Myers, when healthy, kind of works into that area as well. We did see the downside of some of the other options in Vegas so far. And even like an Aaron Rodgers kind of bumps up a little bit more in terms of his fantasy value. But overall, it's a good trade, and it makes the Jets a better football team, but it does not address the real needs. And yeah, like Toxic said, Davante Adams went from a 2-4 team to another 2-4 team. And like you see people on social media, it's like he wanted to go to a place where it was like a guaranteed contender with a long, like, proud history, and you went to the Jets. So it feels like a bit of a because there are so many better options, it felt like, just for the overall enjoyment of football. Like, the Jets needed a number 2 receiver. He comes in as a number 2 receiver. But, like, him on the Ravens would have been amazing. Him on the Chiefs would have been unbelievable, right? Him on the Bills, same thing. Even, like, I was going to say, it wouldn't be the same, but it would be an upgrade on what the Cowboys are trotting out there on a weekly basis as their number 2 wide receiver. Like, they need skill position players. And so this was one where it just kind of felt like he is an upgrade over what they have, but it's not necessarily how they would use him. So it's a weird one, but I do think it is kind of a good thing there for the New York Jets overall. I mean, they brought in a talented player today. It's something that they needed to do. Oh, we have breaking news as we are talking. Speaking of the Buffalo Bills needing wide receiver help. Amari Cooper has been traded to the Buffalo Bills. Just got this alert right now on my phone. So for those who are watching live, we are reacting to this in real time. Buffalo will be sending a 3rd-round pick to Cleveland as part of a pick swap, according to NFL Network's Tom Pelissero. So that is, I think, honestly, I think that is a bigger shift than Davante Adams going to the Vegas Raiders. Like, this is, I think, a big move. And for Amari Cooper, it gets him out of the situation that we were talking about getting him out of for a really, really long time. He is still, I think, a very high-level wide receiver. And I think that now, from a fantasy standpoint, sky is the limit for this kid. I think the world of Amari Cooper's talents. Again, Raider fan here. So this has been a time, hey. But from we'll talk fantasy in a second. I'm just kind of like bouncing all this around. Let's talk first about what this means for the Buffalo Bills. That was a lot of Curtis Samuel last night against the New York Jets in big situations. Now you have a guy who is legitimately again, high-level wide receiver that can really help this offense out. I think that we saw over the first 5-6 weeks of the season with the Buffalo Bills that this was an offense that could put up points when Josh Allen has the Superman cape on. But there are limitations to that. And now I think you take a lot of those limitations away. And if Shakir comes back, all of a sudden he's a number 2, Keon Coleman's your number 3, and Curtis Samuel is your number 4, you feel really, really good about that offense. And so I think that this really does do a lot of positives for the Buffalo Bills offense and makes them a real contender again in the AFC. And like I said, I think this will have more of an impact on the Buffalo Bills than Davante Adams will have on the New York Jets. Sorry, I think that Davante Adams goes in and just it gives you another guy who can make plays which the Jets needed, but it is still a number 2 wide receiver. This is a high-level playmaker who is still playing at a high level, or still can play at a high level anyway, going to the Buffalo Bills, who that was their main area of need. The Jets had a couple of other ones. This was kind of it. Defensively, the Bills still need a bit of work. But this is a big move, I think, to acquire an Amari Cooper to the Buffalo Bills. So again, gigantic move. And again, from a fantasy standpoint, if you were holding on to Amari Cooper, by golly gee, what a gigantic win this is for you, because this was a lost season for him out in Cleveland and just an unmitigated disaster, and he was not going to be used properly. Now, he could potentially, like, if he had started the year on Buffalo, I wonder how high he would have been drafted. This makes him I think, extremely valuable fantasy football commodity. And you weren't going to be sitting Josh Allen anyway, but I do think that this bumps up Josh Allen a little bit more as a fantasy football starter. And I don't think it hinders anyone else in this offense. Like Curtis Samuel, probably, if you're owning him anyway, odds are the season wasn't going awesome for you. So, but I do think that there is something there now with an Amari Cooper that, like Khalil Shakir, is going to get a little bit less of the attention. And same with Keon Coleman. And so I think those guys will kind of continue in the roles that they have. So great news, I think, for Buffalo. For the Cleveland Browns, this is so clearly waving the white flag. And honestly, getting a third round pick in a pick swap, like, it's not going to be a game changer anyway. It frees up a little bit of cap space, but what are they going to use cap space for when you are paying Deshaun Watson the amount of money that you are paying him? So it at least gets you a lottery ticket and opens up a spot for maybe someone else to shine. Jerry Jeudy, I think, is going to get all the attention now coming out of this move, and I think that while it feels like maybe he gets a little bit more of the opportunity, I think he gets a lot more of the attention. And so I think this is kind of a net negative for him. And also, it just makes this offense worse. And so I think it's a net negative for kind of everyone on the Cleveland Browns side of things for fantasy football. So, a lot going down in the NFL today. Some big moves in the National Football League. So we will pivot now and go into the fantasy football talk as it's time for the waiver wire for this week. All right, big changes happening in the National Football League. This week, only a couple of teams on bye, but still, we have a few holes that need to be plugged in terms of fantasy football. So let's go through the waiver wire, shall we? Our quarterback this week is Andy Dalton. He'll be facing Washington. Had a decent bounce back last week. I think we saw that there are limitations with Andy Dalton. If his team isn't, if you're facing a good defense, his team isn't good enough, and he's not good enough to, overcome that. But if Andy Dalton is going out there and facing bad defenses, which I would categorize Washington as, then, hey, look at this, Andy Dalton has some fantasy value. And so I think this week will be a good week for Dalton, for Deontay Johnson, and even a little bit for Xavier Legette, who didn't make the waiver wire list here, but I do think is a, if you're desperate, move for sure. Coming in at wide receiver, we do have Darius Slayton, 33% owned. They'll be facing Philadelphia, which is not a matchup that scares you. And he has had 11 targets in back-to-back weeks. Now, we'll see what happens with Malik Neighbors, but I do think that there are going to be some opportunities for Darius Slayton, regardless of Neighbors' status. We may have forgotten the last time we saw Juju Smith-Schuster out on the field. He was ripping it up, and we probably just saw his last game, but he is still only 33% owned, and I think he has to potentially get some pretty good volume and kind of help this offense move forward. So I think that Juju Smith-Schuster still has fantasy football value and still should be picked up. Rashad Bateman at 11% owned. 12 targets, 8 receptions the last 2 games, facing a Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense that gives up a lot of fantasy points. So I think you can... I think that he is even someone you would probably consider starting this week. We're not missing a ton of great wide receivers, I don't think, from a fantasy standpoint, but he is someone that if injuries have been a thing or whatever, I think he can plug into the lineup. And then Demario Douglas has repeated 9 targets and 6 receptions in each of the last 2 games. They're facing a Jacksonville defense that is a struggle, and I think they are going to be able to prop this thing up and kind of get this thing moving. And you saw the difference between 9 receptions and 2 targets 2 weeks ago with Brissett and this week was I think like 40 extra yards and a touchdown. I do think that Drake May worked through some shit in that first half, but is now starting to get a little bit comfortable as that second half went on and starting to understand some things. And again, facing Jacksonville, I think there is going to be some options for Demario Douglas to go off this week. At running back, Tyler Algier, you're kind of chasing it a little bit. He has the really big game for Atlanta. Even without the big explosions, though, he has had the opportunities, and we've kind of been talking about that for a little bit. Facing a Seattle defense that's just okay. At 30% owned, it's a good ad. This one is a bit more of a volume one, and it's also a bit of a monitor as the week goes on. But Ty Chandler, 28% owned. If Aaron Jones is out, then I think Chandler gets a lot of pretty good volume, even though it is a tougher matchup against Detroit. So that one is a bit more of a if you are desperate. At tight end, it's Colby Parkinson, 16% owned. He's against the Raiders, so why not? And on defense, it is New Orleans. Going up against Denver, Bo Nix on a short week. I think that Dennis Allen will be able to game plan some stuff up. Bo Nix comes out of Sunday with a pretty good day, but a lot of that was garbage time. So going up against another good defense in New Orleans, I think he kind of gets limited there. So those are the fantasy football waiver wire options for the week. If you guys ever have any fantasy football questions and you're watching live, let me know in the chat. Or if you're watching after, put them in the comments in the YouTube video, and we'll either answer them at the time or in the next video, or honestly, probably both. Let's continue in fantasy, but a little bit different as we look at the fantasy football dumpster darlings for the week. Each week, we are reminded how cruel fantasy football can be when you have superstar players put up duds and guys you've never heard of have the games of their lives, switching the balance of fantasy football seasons forever. And so each week, we go through and look at who were the dumpster darlings in fantasy football, who put up the biggest points for the least amount of teams in fantasy this week. Let's go with our dumpster darlings. At quarterback, only 11% owned. Thank you, garbage time. It was Bo Nix with 21.74 fantasy points. At wide receiver, Gabe Davis, only 17% owned. Remember when he was going to be the difference for Trevor Lawrence? Me neither. He comes in at 19 fantasy points. Demario Douglas, 8% owned, 18.2 fantasy points. Helping things out in New England a little bit. At running back, Sean Tucker, who, if you said you had heard of him going into the season, you're probably lying. 32.7 fantasy points, just muddying up that running back situation in Tampa Bay even more. Ray Davis, 14% owned, a big Monday night, gets him 16.7 fantasy points. At tight end, Hunter Henry, the highest owned of the bunch at 26%. He comes in with 11.6 fantasy points. And our flex is Dameon Pierce, just 6% owned now, 14.2 fantasy points. Our kicker is Matthew Wright, which is probably a made-up name, but he's 9% owned, and he got 13 fantasy points. And the Detroit defense, probably not going to put up some big numbers a whole lot this year, but they did this week, getting 18 points. So this team, where Hunter Henry is the biggest owned player at 26%, he comes in at 165.14 fantasy points. Just absolutely gross and disgusting what can happen with these big players, or with these big games for guys who are barely owned. So that is the fantasy football discussion for the week. Let's go now to the sport of hockey, as it is the Calgary Flames back in action tonight against the Chicago Blackhawks. Let's talk about it. The Calgary Flames look to stay perfect when they take on the Chicago Blackhawks tonight. And I think that, obviously, from a record standpoint, you literally couldn't have asked for anything better from Calgary. But again, when you are seeing how they are playing, and this year, we have been kind of driving home. Results don't matter for this team. This is not the results-based year. But it's nice to be getting them, and it's nice to be getting them in the style of play that they're doing. It is the hard work, grinding things out, and creating opportunities off of that is working for this team right now. They aren't going to out-talent many teams in the National Hockey League. Probably only a couple, quite frankly. But I do think that this is going to be a team that is going to be able to really battle and really make teams work. And so as someone who is holding on to a ticket of Flames under 81.5, 6 in 3 games isn't helping that out a whole lot. But this is a lot of positive signs for Calgary. And the biggest one is how well Jonathan Huberdeau is playing. And this was the exact reason why you brought in Anthony Mantha. And did Mantha here potentially cost them some playing time in the NHL for Jacob Pelletier? Yes, it did, probably. But we have said for a bit, or at least I have said for a bit, Huberdeau's not going anywhere. You are not going to be moving this guy unless it's in the video games that we do. If in reality, Jonathan Huberdeau ain't going anywhere. So you may as well try to make the most out of it. And right now, Anthony Mantha is making the most out of it. To the point where you are already having the, do we need to keep him conversation? And like you don't want to be giving long-term contracts out to many people right now. If you are the Calgary Flames, that they just do not have the guys who are long-term contract, type of players. And I'm not even saying you give Mantha a contract extension now. Like, let this play out. But if it continues in this way, then there's, I think, going to be a few more conversations to be had, because I think we all kind of agree that this started as, well, he's getting traded at some point. So then Coronado can come up into a spot, or their Pelche or whoever is going to be able to come in, and that's going to be that, and it's going to be so much fun. But now that he's getting the most out of Jonathan Huberdeau, which in turn is helping out a Martin Pospisil, it just kind of unlocks a couple more things with this Flames team. And for a team that we are not expecting to be all that great, it does kind of muddy the waters a little bit, but I do think that it gives you... it's nice to know that this guy who you're paying a lot of money to still has at least a little bit of that left in the tank. And that, I think, is going to be a big help for the Flames now moving forward. If they can get that guy back to, he's never going to be 115 point guy again, right? Like, that's not. But if you can get him point per game, 85, 90 point guy, then all of a sudden now it's still not, well, plan the parade or anything like that. But it is still, it is an offensive weapon now that you can go, okay, now it gets a little bit easier to score goals. And now we have another line instead of just Backlund and Coleman that we can put a kid with. And now they are reaching their full potential in Martin Pospisil. So really opening some things up for the Calgary Flames early on in the season. Jonathan Huberdeau playing as well as he has. Dustin Wolf gets the call in goal tonight. It certainly seems like they're kind of sheltering him a little bit, right? Like, I know it is looking like it is one on, one off, one on, one off, one on, one off. But it's also kind of been, with all due respect, it has kind of also been so far good team, bad team, good team, bad team. And so I don't think it's by accident. I don't think it's just a happy coincidence that Wolf's first two games are going to be against Philadelphia, who didn't make the playoffs, and Chicago, who was super far away for making the playoffs. And Vladar's first couple of games have been Vancouver, playoff team, Edmonton, playoff team. I think that's by design. And so we will see if that sheltering continues as the season goes along. Toxic in the chat, always nice to beat the Oilers no matter if the Flames are in rebuild or not. Yes, I think that there would be Flames fans here who would be perfectly content with the Flames going 3-79 with the 3 wins coming against the Edmonton Oilers. So, puck drop tonight is at 7 o'clock. Once the game is done, I will be on Game Over Calgary with Anand to put a bow on it and tell you all you need to know about that game. So there is that. Now let's go to the combat sports world, shall we? It was a very busy weekend in that world, so let's talk about it, starting with professional wrestling. AEW Wrestle Dream turned into a nightmare for Bryan Danielson as the career of the American Dragon comes to a close. And I think this is a really crucial time for AEW now. The pressure is off a little bit, like they have the TV deal. I'm not saying that this time is going to like completely crumble them into nothingness and they're going to be bankrupt. I'm not one of those people who talk about wrestling on the internet. Although I will say, I have found myself, when watching an AEW show, my initial reaction to almost everything is to be negative on it. And I think I that is a me problem, not a them problem, and I do think I need to change it. Now, there are times where, if you're watching it with even a slightly analytical mind, some of the stuff on there is fucking insane. But when MJF and Adam Cole come back in the segment and you're like, oh, wow, what is it? It's like, well, no, this is just really fucking cool. And so let's just enjoy that. And I do find it interesting that they have kind of turned the pay-per-views into the spots where the big returns happen and stuff like that, right? Like the debuts and all of those happen on pay-per-view, and then you get the dream match stuff on television. It's quite interesting how they have made the pay-per-view a bit more of the, look, you just got to put your money down because it's going to be unpredictable and you don't know where this thing is going to go. That has been interesting. But now, as we go into this kind of new era with Moxley as the champion and a lot of speculation as to who is with him and what goes on in that world and all of that, and like some NWO and all of those things, this story, I think, has to be a home run for AEW. I think that if it ends up being just a bit of a dud again, as we have seen a few things be, then I think it could be something that sets a lot of people off and would be difficult for them to come back. Again, you have the new TV deal with TNT, and so that this isn't or with WBD just in general. So this isn't a life or death situation, but I do think if this company wants to get back to where it was before, where selling 3,000 tickets isn't viewed as a win, and getting into the, like, upper hundred thousands isn't a win, it's just every week, then I think this has to be one of the catalysts to get people back. Because the big ones that they have tried over the last little while haven't necessarily worked, right? Like, think of the big storylines that they have done around these sorts of things just in the last little bit. They have tried it's the Elite who are now taking over AEW, and we have the big angle with Tony Khan taking a tombstone pile driver and getting the TK blah 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 blah, and now he is on the NFL draft in a neck brace, and everyone thinks it's hilarious and all of that, but there hasn't really been an appropriate follow to this. Like, they tried where we're fighting for the life of AEW in this blood and guts and all of those sorts of things, and then it just doesn't kind of go anywhere, and it's not fully explained what powers the Bucks have and what powers Tony Khan has and why one is fighting for the other, or why they are fighting against each other, and what it actually means and what we're fighting for and all of that. It's just kind of I don't know. And this can't be that. This needs to be, if we're doing an invasion or if we are doing a whatever the hell it is, this needs to be way more NWO and not Aces and Eights or the New Blood against the Millionaires Club or anything like that. Like, this needs to be compelling television on a week in, week out basis, because you can get people back. And these are the types of ones where if they are home runs, then you start to see those arenas fill up a little bit quicker and a little bit more. And you start to see the TV ratings go up a little bit more. And that sort of thing starts to build. The in-ring is always there for AEW. And this was another phenomenal show when it comes to that sort of a thing. But this is this, and now this is this, and this is this, and these guys are, well, now they're fighting, and now they hate each other. It's like, well, why? What do we care? Why are the Acclaimed trying to fight for the life of AEW? Why is AEW's life on the line? Why is it Team AEW against Team The Elite? They're all AEW. That felt like a real loss. And even like the Swerve Hangman story was really good and really well built. And then some people were turned off by the violence at the end, and that kind of, I think, had that fizzle a little bit more. Some of it was good, some of it wasn't. But I do think that AEW, they have done a lot of things right, and I don't think they get enough credit for the things that they have done right. And even storytelling, I think it's something that people latch onto because they hear Eric Bischoff talking about it, and then you can just like, oh, well, yeah, see, there's no story in this. It's like, well, there's some. You just wish they would present it in a better way, and there are things that can be tightened up, but this one I don't think this one cannot be a things need to be tightened up. This story needs to be a, oh my god, this is the start of the next chapter. When we're doing the history of AEW series on HBO Max in 5 or 10 years, this needs to be their, again, the comparisons to the NWO are going to be obvious given how it looks like this thing's going to go. But this needs to be their Hogan leg dropping Randy Savage. This needs to be the big moment that starts a real turn of momentum now for this company. And we have seen they have stuck to stipulations pretty well. The Bryan Danielson one is going to be interesting. He was apparently really banged up, but you do like that a lot of the focus was on kind of the AEW originals and stuff like that going around after it. So I think this is going to be really good, and I think I'm really intrigued. Well, I don't think I'm really intrigued. I know I'm really intrigued. And I hope that it catches as many people as it's caught. It catches people as much as it has caught me, and I also hope that it is a catalyst for something really big for this company. Speaking of big things happening, we had a gigantic clash in the boxing world this week. Let's talk about it. The boxing world stunned. Well, not stunned. But Beterbiev ends up getting a majority decision win over Dmitry Bivol. And it's frustrating because we talk about like, oh, boxing can't get out of its way, boxing can't get out of its way, boxing can't get out of its way. And you Google it today, and like all week, and I don't think I fell for the hype or anything like that. I think that this is just I looked at this fight as one that was a long time coming, and it was a fight of two guys who are at the top of this weight class right now, finally meeting each other in still, even though advanced age a little bit, still toward the peak of their prime. And so like this was, I was talking all week about how this could be the start of a classic rivalry. And this is going to launch both of these guys into another level of superstardom and launch the winner probably into a top 3 or 4 spot in the pound for pound rankings right now. And instead, coming out of this fight, you Google it, and top stories right now. Dmitry Bivol's team expresses their frustration following Beterbiev fight. Roy Jones Jr. Reveals his exact score. Turkey Al-Ashik must tell Arthur Beterbiev that Dmitry Bivol rematch must happen. All of these things. And oh, why this wasn't a robbery. Did the judges get the scores right? All of these different things. These scores rattled me. We must get a rematch. I feel empty coming off of this. It is so boxing that you have what should have been one of the fights and one of the like tentpole moments of the year, and instead now we're talking about judging, we're talking about controversy, we're talking about all of these things that boxing just can't get away from. And it's so incredibly frustrating to come out of this whole build and have that be the thing that ends up doing this. And so I think that boxing has come a real long way in the last few years in terms of the matchmaking that we are getting. And we can certainly question how we are getting there based off of Turkey and Turkey Al-Sheikh and Saudi Arabia and all of that. But we have got to a pretty good spot, I think, with this group. And so with this sports story right now. And so when these things come up, it's just a reminder that we still have a long way to go. Like you have this, you have like Usyk and Fury are fighting in December, and it's for the unified championships, but not undisputed, because we had to strip a guy and give it to another dude over there. And then you have like big fight controversy again. We can't keep doing this in boxing. I don't think this is going to be the death of boxing or anything like that, but it does kind of halt some momentum and just kind of harshens the mellow a little bit for everything that was going on. Walt Grizzly in the chat, thoughts on the big trades. We talked about this at the start, so not going to go super in depth on it here, Walt, but I think that the Raiders got what they could for Davante Adams in a situation that they didn't handle properly, and I think the conditional second round pick is about as well as they could have done. For the Jets, it's a move you kind of have to make, even though I don't think a second playmaker on offense, or in the pass catching game, is really the exact thing that this team needed. It is at least another guy who can go out and make some plays, because it was just a little bit too much Alan Lazard for a potential championship team. And I think it gives you a bit of a boost there in the passing game. And I think it'll be good for Davante Adams, because we talked about it before. He is not one who is getting a ton of separation on guys anymore. He is going to be a contested catch guy, and Aaron Rodgers is going to feel very comfortable throwing those contested catches to Davante Adams because of the, I guess, symmetry that they have, or the comfort that they have with each other. And from a fantasy standpoint, I think that it helps all the guys in New York, because it just makes the offense a little bit better. And I think it's, you weren't going to be starting the quarterbacks in Vegas anyway. And I think it makes Myers and Bowers like move up a little bit, but you're probably starting them anyway. For Amari Cooper, I think it's a huge deal for Buffalo. This was, I think, the biggest need is going out and getting a playmaker. And I think Amari Cooper still has a lot of talent left in that body, and it was being completely wasted in Cleveland. I think he is a legitimate number one option on a team that needed a legitimate number one option. And so I come away from this day where Buffalo beat the Jets last night, and I kind of think they won the day again today by getting Amari Cooper and really addressing that need. And they still have needs on the defensive side of the football. I think last night proved that again, but this was one of the top 2 or 3 things on their checklist that I think a lot of people would agree that they need. And so I don't think the power dynamic shifted in the division, because I liked the Bills more before, and now I just like them a little bit extra. And yeah, well, to your point, I love this trade for the Bills. A third round pick to go out and get your number one receiver. Like this, legitimately, this makes this a Buffalo Bills team that is, I think, a defensive player away from, again, being a Super Bowl contender. That's how much I think the needle moves with this particular trade for the Buffalo Bills. And then from a fantasy standpoint, if you held on to Amari Cooper, you are throwing parades across cities and all of that. Like that, this is just a gigantic move for you. What player do you think defensive player do you think they need? That is an interesting question. Honestly, you know what? We had kind of did the Raider thing at the beginning, and a lot of teams are calling on Max Crosby now. That's obvious. But like just again off the top of my head, Spillane with the Raiders, he is a linebacker who just kind of feels like he is everywhere. I think they kind of need something along those lines to kind of help out in the middle of the field. I do think they need another coverage guy as well. I don't like off the top of my head, I don't know who would be available for that sort of a thing. Like just the teams that would have that kind of a guy wouldn't be giving them up. And like Cleveland, I don't think their identity is going to be so based around their defense that I don't think they're going to be trading guys away. So when we look at the teams that are going to be in like blow it up mode, like I don't think Carolina has one that they would want to be giving away. And so like the coverage things, that one may have to just be schemed a little bit more. So if you can get a linebacker in there that can kind of help patrol the middle of the field, and Spillane is all over the field at kind of that second level, I think that would be good. Obviously, again, I'm very Raider focused. So I'm like, well, Max Crosby just helps everything. But if you can kind of get maybe a bit more of a pass rush, that would help. But again, I think the Raiders are going to be asking a lot for Max Crosby, so I don't think that would necessarily be the move. But it is... That might be something to look at a different point this week, is players that could or should be available, because we know the NFL kind of sucks at trading, but I think that the need is growing in Buffalo, and I think this shows that they are willing to address that, because this was something they didn't do in the offseason when we thought they should, maybe even last season. But we thought they needed a defensive player last season, and they didn't go out and do that. This is showing, I think, a level of urgency. And I think it's for a couple of things that we talked about, Walt, last week, where we talked about like how few legitimately good teams there are in this league. If you are looking around, Buffalo had a stretch there where it was just absolutely putrid. And now they are leading their division. They feel like the clear front runners in their division. And when you look at the AFC, it's like, well, Kansas City is just barely scraping by in their games. I still think very good team. But Kansas City's kind of barely scraping by. Like Baltimore, they look good against bad defenses, except the Raiders. But what kind of defense do they have? Like, how confident are we in them going forward? Like, there isn't well, this team's doing this great, so just do your best, but it's probably not going to go well. I think you are seeing that teams are recognizing, hey, this is wide fucking open right now. And so I do think that this should be a bit more like a traditional sports trade deadline period. Like Walt saying there in the chat, do you think the Saints should go into rebuild mode? Kinda, yeah. Now they are in a tricky spot because I mean the division feels, speaking of divisions that feel wide open, like Atlanta one week looks amazing and the next week they don't. And New Orleans, like that defense is good enough that they can keep them competitive in those games. But yeah, you look at like beyond this year, you have Olave, who is a solid receiver. And you have a good defensive coach with some defensive players over there. But this is not going to be a team that is set up for Super Bowl success, right? They are, I think their ceiling is 9-8, and you hope that you face a team that slips on a banana peel. And then like you finish 9-8, you win your division, you win that first wild card game because you have home field advantage. You take on a team that slips on a banana peel in the divisional round, and holy shit, look at this, we're in the NFC Championship game. Like that is kind of your peak, is that, well, hopefully 9 things go well for us and we can get it. And they just have a ceiling. And so, yeah, like I think that they should be looking at making some of those moves. I think that when you look at, like, Carolina is kind of already doing it. And boy, if they're in a spot to draft a quarterback again, that would be a really fun discussion. But let's look at some of the other teams who are kind of in struggles right now. Jacksonville at 1-5. Holy hell, do they need to shake things up? That one's tough because you have the quarterback locked in, and so they kind of need to be in asset acquiring mode instead of like full-on dump, rebuild, whatever. The Browns absolutely should try to be rebuilding. The Rams, 100%. Same with the Bengals. And like you look at some of these teams where it might be a little bit more on the fence, but now so many players and so many teams are all kind of bunched up. If you can be a seller and take advantage of this and go out and like, hey, take a couple of our guys, get first and second, we'll take those. You don't need those. You're going for a championship. I think that this has the potential to be like other sports trade deadlines, and hopefully we do get to that point. If they're looking to rebuild, would moving Latimer make sense? He's 28 now. 100%. Latimer would be a really good one. And you talk about, like, I think Buffalo is an obvious one that we are discussing. They would need that 100%. I think Baltimore is probably in need of some help in that area as well. I would suggest maybe even Philadelphia, given like they have some youth out there at defensive back, but I think having a Lattimore there would help to kind of solidify some stuff on the defensive side of the ball for that team. And you could see Dallas doing something stupid and giving up high level draft pick for that. Excuse me, because the defense in Dallas is dog shit right now too. So yeah, like it feels like if there is going to be a year, AFC does seem more likely, Walt. You're right. Just how these things work. I mean, we saw it today with Davante Adams, right? The rumors that the Chiefs were offering a second. Well, we don't want to trade him in division. Yeah, if you have Lattimore, and at 28, you can, I guess, like talk yourself into that a little bit more, that you don't want to be having to compete with that guy. But also, if he is not helping you win now and you just need to get the most assets back, then just get the most assets back. But probably AFC would make the most sense for that. But it does really feel like, again, we have so many of these teams bottled up that if one or two bad teams just wants to be like, hey, you know what? Yard sale, man. Whatever you want, everything must go. There could be a lot of value to be had for those lesser teams, and B, a chance to really put yourself over the top if you are one of the top teams in the NFL. So a lot of really good discussion happening, and a lot of real intriguing storylines around the National Football League here this year. So it's I think that we could get we've already had a little bit more kind of action trading wise than we've normally seen around the National Football League. And so now it is kind of okay, what's next? Who's next? Where are we going? What are we doing? What's happening here? Even like Carolina, like I know you're kind of saving things a little bit, but the wins aren't coming. If one of the upper teams loses a quarterback or something, Andy Dalton, available. There, take him. Go. Adam Thielen, out of here. Get on. Good going. Deontay Johnson, maybe. No. Deontay Johnson, you probably need to keep around. Like, you do need some guys for your young quarterback to catch the ball from. But, no, I think there's a lot of intriguing options that are out there. Let's get back into the world of combat sports now, as UFC had another fight night card this weekend. It was a couple interesting fights at the top of it. So let's break that all down. The crafty vet still has it, as Brandon Royval with a split decision win over Tatsuro Taira. 47-48 and 48-47 times 2 gives him the split decision win. Also, Park Yun-young with a split decision win over Brad Tavares. And so what do we take from this? One, Brandon Royval is still... I mean, it by the hair on his chinny chin chin, which I guess for me is a bit. But for him to be able to come out and outpoint Tara and get a victory there shows that I think that there is... I think rumors of his demise were a little bit exaggerated. And people just assuming that this young kid was going to come in and just blow right through him. I simply didn't believe that. So he still has something there in the tank. And I still think championship caliber fighter, maybe not, but high level fighter in the flyweight division right now that is still kind of developing. Yeah, I think he can be that. And for Park Yun-young, it's a win. Brad Tavares has done a lot of losing, and he has been finished in a lot of different spots. And so again, to lose by split or to win by split decision and to not necessarily have that real big impactful moment, it just kind of feels like there were opportunities there for these young fighters this weekend to go out and kind of take the headlines, take that spotlight, and really drive home that, no, I'm someone to be watched in this next run here, this next year for the UFC. And instead they're just like, well, it's a win. Oh, it's a close loss. It is what it is. That's not, I don't think what these guys, well, obviously it's not what they wanted. And I think that this does kind of, I don't think there's like a bigger picture thing here or anything like that. It's a good win for Royval. Does it get him into title contention? I don't think so. It's a good win for Park Young-yong. Does it get him into even, I think, top 15 consideration? Probably not. And at 33, like, it kind of just has to start going now for him. But it's a win coming off of a split decision loss, his first fight of the year. So that does kind of get you back on track a little bit for him, and now it's kind of onward and upward. So maybe that was just it all along. It was just get in the cage, get some fights in, and start to progress here a little bit and start to really push this thing forward in the middleweight division. But it was, like I said, I feel like this weekend was a little bit more about missed opportunities than, oh wow, this guy came out and really did the damn thing. Coming up this weekend, it is Anthony Hernandez taking on Michel Pereira. You have Hernandez, who is 30 years old. He is coming off of a pretty good run here. He beat Roman Kopylov by submission at the beginning part of the year. He has won 5 fights in a row. Taking on Pereira, who has certainly been polarizing, was in the beginning part of his career, came out, did a whole lot of dancing, a whole lot of a shtick, and then did a whole lot of losing. But since then, he has come out, he's won 8 fights in a row. And so you have a couple of really intriguing fighters in the middleweight division stepping up. And then you have Rob Font fighting in the bantamweight division. Font is still, I think, a exciting fighter, but the results haven't been there. Now, the results haven't been there against Figueiredo, Sandhagen, Marlon Vera, and Jose Aldo. Tough to get those results. And so it is just a question of how far has he fallen and where does Kyler Phillips rank? At 29 years old, Phillips has won 3 fights in a row, and coming off of a win over Pedro Munoz, this is a good kind of next step for him. So a couple intriguing fights on the UFC card this week. All right, that is going to do it for the Combat Sports Talk. I think we covered everything. And yeah, toxic. Mike Evans and Dak almost lost me my fantasy this week. Totally. Like, and Walt, to your point, like, Lattimore did a good job in shutting Evans down. And we have seen how important that type of a thing has become and how prevalent it has become again here in the NFL. When you think about what the Chiefs are doing right now against number 1 wide receivers and what Denver has the ability to do with Patrick Surtain and doing that kind of a lockdown thing. If you can just be trusted on just the number 1 guy, and then you can kind of shift a whole lot of your other stuff over to the number 2 or 3 options, all of a sudden you have a very good defense and you have really limited what that offense can do. Because again, no one is taking deep shots. No one is doing all these things. And now you are kind of limiting what those options can be. So having that type of a guy to be able to lock it down is so important these days. And yeah, like Toxic won by half a point in the Vampire League. That is that's snug. That's tough a little bit. So we will glad you were able to get that one through. But it's time for me to go. Thank you guys so much for hanging out today. We'll be back tomorrow with 2 streams. One, the live show that comes on at tomorrow. It'll be at 10 a.m. So catch it there. And then we are going to do the video game stream tomorrow at 3. And again, for hockey fans, I'm going to be on Game Over Calgary coming up tonight. Game starts at 7. We'll be on immediately after the game is done. Thank you guys so much for hanging out today, and I will talk with all of you. Yeah, I guess technically 2 stream day as well. Just not in places that I own anymore. So there's that. But yes, have a great day, guys.